this episode, I'm in conversation with Robin Williams, co-founder and managing director of Data Hive. Robin has been involved in and around marketing and conversion rate optimization since 2013. Data Hive provides research data to agencies to help them align their services to be successful in a challenging digital world. So Robin, in one of your recent blog posts, you suggested there were two questions to unlock business growth. The first was, why do you want to grow? And the second was, what does growth look like for your business? It seems to me that these questions are very unlikely for a business to ask itself. So firstly, what do you believe are the best reasons for a business wanting to grow? And secondly, what are the most common answers you get to what growth looks like?
I think it's a good question, this, because I think a lot of business, when business starts, there's just this assumption that it's growth that they're chasing, and people say, we're growing and we're doing this, and all their activity is around growth. I think quite a few businesses and business owners sometimes have never actually sat down and defined why they want to grow and what that growth look like. And I think for me and the people I've been working with, it's something that's really useful to come back and ask time and again, because that may change over time. The answers are very different for everybody. And I think this is one of the reasons I ask that question to a lot of people I work with, because growth is different to different people and it means different things. And again, once you sort of unravel what that growth, the why they're trying to do something, it's a lot easier to start defining what that needs to look like and support that business in getting that step. So some businesses I've worked at, they want to grow in terms of team size. Their idea of growth is to have a big office, lots of people in the space, and that's their growth. But if I challenge them on where profitability is in that, because you can have a great big team, you can be a big business with lots of great office space, something we're seeing now through the COVID side, actually, is that what growth should look like? Or could you be a small team but highly profitable? And is that the kind of growth that people want? Is it more customers or less customers but bigger clients? So I think it's a very important thing before any business tries to grow, is to just define those two questions, really.
And that, when you think about the growth, do people tend to put a turnover figure on it?
There's a lot of KPIs people will say, different ones that apply to them. And I do remember being in a meeting as part of a senior team with quite a large organization, 100 million plus, and they were showing the KPIs and said, but this dashboard of KPIs, it's these 5 we need to look at. And quite a few was remarked. They're saying, well, surely the key performance indicators should be the only ones that we watch, not the other things. It's kind of all these different drivers of growth. Revenue per person is an interesting KPI or number that people have heard. Different SaaS and startup companies talk about this in a few different ways, mostly from the American side of business. And it's one that I don't think a lot of British companies I've spoken with have considered. As a business, if your revenue per person goes up and you're profitable, is that a good sign of growth? Do you need to grow more people, or is that just working because you want to stay a small team that's manageable, but actually your profitability goes up?
It seems like that's a pretty good indicator. And as you say, I've been aware of it having worked for American companies in the past.
Yeah.
But I think that whilst turnover is a good measure of growth, they used to say that turnover is vanity and profitability is sanity. Do people look at the bottom line as regard to a growth figure?
I think it's different. Having spent some time in analytics and reporting, it's amazing how little view people have from a digital side. There's some drivers of numbers that people have a view of, the traditional business metrics, but they don't really seem to have a view of what the audience is doing and what it's likely to do. A lot of analytics and reporting for business growth I've found is post-action. So what's happened to now? It doesn't really forecast very well. And some people say that that's very hard to do. It's like fortune telling. But actually, what you can start to do is look at trends, and you can look at other factors around what's happening in the world. And that's something where I think, businesses could could potentially understand a little bit more, but it has to be very, very much bespoke for their view, and defining why they want to grow and what that growth looks like makes it very easy then for a business. It's not an easy task, but it's easy to then focus on what those outcomes are.
Because I would suggest that cash flow forecast and business projections with regard to turnover and profitability using the cash flow is a very strong key performance indicator when you're looking to grow. But is that part of the normal modus operandi of companies, and so they don't take that into account with regard to how they're going to move from A to B to C to D?
I think cash flow, I mean, it's the lifeblood of the business. There's lots of big companies reliant on cash coming in, and as soon as that gets stalled, that's something that I noticed very quickly in March, how little runway people had behind them, and how quickly big companies were shaken, probably pretty much the foundations of, as soon as the cash flow stopped, there was no month or two in reserve. Some had maybe 4 or 5 weeks in reserve, some had 2 weeks. If you're a small growing company or a mid-sized company and you've just invested in stuff, as soon as the cash flow stops, without those reserves, it is the lifeblood. But I think potentially that chase for constant cash flow has to be done. But at the same time, that can sort of change your focus of what you're doing. For a lot of businesses I work with, some smaller agencies or some other digital companies, you've got to kind of invest and speculate to get the money back longer term. So it's hard to keep cash flow reserves up. And you're always, when you're starting out, kind of working with clients on a kind of, well, if we hit this point, then we start getting some money in, but you've got to sell that before you get paid.
Yes.
And also, it's a kind of 50-50. You've got to reach these milestones. So I suppose it's about a company understanding its turnover, its costs before it does that. And again, distilling that down into what growth looks like. If growth is reliant on cash flow and you want to grow because you want to gain lots more team members or pick bigger clients, you're going to have to start smaller and work up. So I think once you've defined it, those KPIs can become a little bit more effective, but definitely cash flow being one of those.
So, although not directly related to cash flow and performance with regard to agencies, etc., you produce a comprehensive state of the agency report, which provides information about, at least UK-based agencies and their online presence. What were the reasons for compiling the report, and what research did you have to do to put it together?
I've been fascinated with data for many years, and I've worked in a lot of audience data before starting Data Hive. And back in 2016, with GDPR coming up, I kind of saw that a lot of businesses were just not really bothered about the use of data or permissions. Marketing was very different even 4 years ago, really. The reason I sort of looked at the State of Agency report was I wanted to talk to agencies and understand where I could fit to help, or where people I know in my network could fit to help. One of the key ways of that is just reflecting what they're doing with their own digital. And it's one of those industries where, you imagine every digital agency to have a fantastic online presence. That's what they're selling. That's what they're kind of building for their customers. We jokingly say, quite a few of us in the industry sort of jokingly say about sort of a plumber's house is never finished, or a builder's house is never finished, because they're busy working on other people's. I think for me, the last year or two, the focus on how an agency brings itself to market, digital is still that key one. In a time where people are searching for things, or you want to represent and attract talent to your agency or customers, they're going to look at you. Networks are great and referrals are great, but it's about attracting, especially if you're reliant on growth and KPIs like cash flow, you need to utilize those sorts of channels, and digital is a fundamental one for digital companies. So I was going to say, in terms of researching that, it's almost who's walking the walk, not just talking the talk out of the digital agencies. And for me, looking city by city was a nice way to stir up good conversations, to share those insights, and to get some engagement around that.
You're listening to the shortened version of this podcast. To listen to the full version, visit your favourite podcast player and search for Webtrends Optimize or The Big Lift.